I did want to take a minute to talk about something other than COVID. So I guess that makes everybody happy, right? You probably heard there's been a lot of discussion over the last year plus about salary thresholds with regard to exempt and non-exempt employees. As you know, for an employee to be exempt, they must at a minimum meet a salary threshold. And then there are duties tests as well. But the first test is that they have to meet a minimum salary threshold. Federal government has raised the salary threshold. Pennsylvania was planning to raise the salary threshold this October, but there was a deal struck between Governor Wolf and the Republican legislature. So that deal is no longer going through. So if you had been looking at doing some raises next week, in anticipation of the raise of the salary threshold, you might want to rethink that. Happy to have a conversation with you for our members, either with Jane on the hotline or with me for member legal services. Keep in mind that the salary threshold in Pennsylvania now kicks back to the federal salary threshold, which is $684 a week. So at a minimum, if you want to have an exempt employee, the first test they have to meet is they have to be paid on a salary basis of $684 a week. So keep in mind, we're also putting an alert out on this as well. So a couple of things I want to talk about related to COVID. A lot of the questions we're getting on the hotline now relate to travel. And the rules are rapidly changing with regard to travel, with regard to what countries are being put on various lists of their risk factors. So those are things to be paying attention to. We're getting a little bit out of vacation season, but we're going to roll right back into it pretty soon with the holidays. So, if you have employees who are traveling, especially internationally, it may be something you want to think about. So at a minimum, whether vaccinated or unvaccinated, people are going to need a negative test to return to the United States, but it's a difference. The requirements beyond that are different depending on whether you're vaccinated or not. So it's something to think about. Do you want to be monitoring your employee travel? We talked about this last summer when Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York all had travel restrictions in place. And many employers were in fact monitoring employee travel. So the question is, do you want to go back to that? And just keep in mind, it may very well be something that you want to do to protect the health and safety of your employees, but you just need to do it consistently. So it's not just for some employees and not for others, it's for everyone. And of course, if you have employees engaging in business travel, you want to be paying close attention to this, because definitely for business travel, you want to make sure you're following all these rules. So those are the rules for international travel. Here are the rules for domestic travel. Again, there's a fairly large difference with regard to the recommendations for vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And again, these are CDC guidelines. These are recommendations. They do not have the force of law, but we know, you've heard me say it 100 times, you as an employer have an obligation to provide a safe workplace for your employees. And one of the ways you might be able to do that if you are in person, or if you have some people coming into a physical location, is to monitor their travel to make sure that you are following all these guidelines. So keep that in mind. And yes, these slides will be available after the webinar. We'll send out an email so you'll have these guidelines for you. This slide has been up here for months and months and months, and I won't cover it again, but I always want to make sure that we're all, because I know we have new people joining every week, make sure we're all, having the same base of knowledge, which is, yes, as an employer, you can require the COVID vaccine. The lawsuits that have been filed so far have gone in favor of the employers. We now have full FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, which I think is a bit of a game changer with regard to arguments that employees may have or hesitation that employees may have. And then we've talked again for months and months about a carrot versus stick approach with regard to all of this. We started out with a lot of carrots, a lot of incentive, but many employers are moving to the stick. The government has moved to the stick. We're seeing it. We've seen it so far in Philadelphia, New Jersey. There are mandates for some workers, including healthcare workers and school employees. Similar mandates in other places, including New York and California. And of course, the federal government has said that their employees and federal contractors need to be vaccinated or undergo regular testing. Interestingly, a legal challenge was filed to that last week. A group of employees got together and filed a legal challenge last week. So stay tuned on that. It'll be big news if something happens with regard to that. And then, of course, we're seeing the stick with private employers as well. At this point, virtually all of big pharma has implemented a vaccine mandate. We're seeing it also in tech and also on Wall Street. Transportation, many of the airlines, I don't think all of the airlines, but many of the airlines have implemented a vaccine mandate, as well as Amtrak. I've quoted this one before, but I think it's interesting. Ladders did a review of job postings in the US and Canada since January of this year. And these are high paying career postings. They've seen a 5,000% increase in job postings listing vaccination requirements. So some employers are taking the tack that we may not require the vaccine for current employees, but we're certainly going to require it for future employees. So something to think about as well. And we've gotten a lot of questions on hotline about what Delta has done around their $200 a month healthcare surcharge for unvaccinated employees. This is pretty much a stay tuned also, but keep in mind that Delta is probably self-insured. They have a little bit more flexibility, but there are implications through HIPAA. There are implications through the ACA. And if this really is something that you're thinking about doing or contemplating doing, please talk to a benefits attorney. I am not a benefits attorney. I can refer you to a good benefits attorney, but please talk to someone because they can do an analysis for you as to whether or not you're potentially violating HIPAA or you're potentially violating the Affordable Care Act. And of course, the big stick, and we're getting a ton of questions on this. Believe me, guys, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I do not. I have never said I don't know or wait and see in my entire legal career as much as I have in the last 18 months. So we all know earlier in September, President Biden announced this COVID action plan. And one of the biggest parts of the plan that'll affect many of our members is that there's a requirement that employers with 100 or more employees ensure their workers are vaccinated or tested weekly. We're waiting on OSHA, who will give us an emergency temporary standard. Until that ETS comes out, it's very, very hard to say what exactly you are going to need to do as an employer. We'd like to believe that the government will give you a lot of time, but I don't know that they will. One of my theories on this is that Biden announced it knowing it would take OSHA a while to get the ETS out, with hoping that many larger employers would just go ahead and mandate the vaccines on their own. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that, like I said, in big pharma and tech on Wall Street. It is happening. So some of the questions that we've been getting: how do you count to 100, right? It's a classic question in virtually every major piece of employment legislation that passes. How do you count to 100 for FMLA purpose? Or how do you count to 50 for FMLA purposes? How do you count to 100 for this purpose? So we've had questions: is it going to be 100 employees in one location? Does it include employees outside the US? Does it include employees working from home? Again, we don't have the answers, but I'm going to guess if you have an aggregate of 100 employees, and definitely if you have an aggregate of 100 employees in the United States, this is going to apply to you. Again, don't quote me on that, because the ETS could say something different, but just based on the way most employment laws are written, that would be my guess. It's not going to matter. You have 20 employees and 20 employees each in 5 different states. It's not going to matter that half of your workforce is working from home. I think it's going to matter that you have 100 employees in the aggregate. The other big question, I've said this repeatedly: who will pay for the testing? I was on the phone with a member just last week who is in Philadelphia, who is affected by that vaccine mandate. Philadelphia has not made it clear at all who should be paying for testing if they have employees who seek an exemption. So hopefully, New Jersey also didn't really make it clear either. So, these are things to be thinking about as an employer. Maybe get in touch with your insurance company, look for resources out there with regard to testing, if there's going to be a testing option out there. So as far as your planning goes, again, see if you might be affected by any of these mandates. I really think it's really important to determine what percentage of your population is vaccinated. You are allowed to ask the question: have you been vaccinated? You are not allowed to ask the follow-up question: why not? If the person says no. And don't take people's word for it. Anybody who's been in HR longer than a minute knows that you will have invariably employees who lie to you. So get the cards, get copies of the cards. The cards are confidential. Keep them in a separate medical file, just like you would any other medical information. Only HR needs to know. There's maybe some exceptions to that if you need to run the business in certain ways, but determine what percentage of your employee population is vaccinated. I think that will give you a very good base to go from to figure out how really difficult or strenuous this might all be. And of course, develop a communication plan. If you haven't done it already, your employees have heard about the mandate coming down the pike, and they want to know what you know. They want to know your position on it. So even if it's just a few sentence long email saying, hey, we know this, that the Biden announced this, we're waiting for additional information, we think we're probably going to be affected. And maybe in that email, give them some resources. Hey, if you haven't gotten vaccinated, here's how you can, right? Remind them that it's free, remind them that the Pfizer vaccine is FDA approved, remind them that they can, where they can go with questions that they might have. There's some good websites out there with some good resources. And another question we're getting a lot is, what about exemptions? Okay, people have asked for medical exemptions, but more than that, people are asking for religious exemptions. The medical exemptions seem to be a handful, but we're getting more and more people looking for religious exemptions. And you may, if you follow professional sports at all, this is becoming an issue right now in the NBA. There was just a player, Andrew Wiggins, who plays for the Warriors in San Francisco. And San Francisco has an ordinance that says to attend a large gathering, you have to be vaccinated. Well, basketball game would count as a large gathering. So he requested a religious exemption from being vaccinated. And the NBA said, well, we can't exempt you from complying with the San Francisco ordinance. So you're not going to be able, if you don't get vaccinated, you're not going to be able to play in any home games. Okay. So I think a lot of times when employers get the religious exemption, the thing they want to, if they want to deny the exemption, the thing they sort of start to attack is the reason for the religion. I've had employers say to me, the Pope says get vaccinated. How can anybody request a religious exemption? I think you're going to have, it's an uphill climb to attack somebody's quote unquote religious belief. And it doesn't even have to be a religious belief, it just has to be a strongly held personal belief. So that's probably not the winning argument. The winning argument is, if you don't get vaccinated, it's an undue burden on us. If you don't get vaccinated, you pose a direct threat to your other employees. And therefore, we don't think that we can accommodate your request. But obviously, every situation needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. Happy to talk that through with any members if you're getting religious exemption requests. But remember, you're probably not going to win on attacking their strongly held personal or religious belief. But there are other ways to deny those exemptions. And again, those lawsuits are starting. I did see a headline for a private school in Delaware County denied a religious exemption of a student, religious exemption request of a student, and a court said, yeah, the school's perfectly within their rights to have the vaccine mandate. So again, let's see what happens. We don't really know for sure, but keep in mind that it's just because the employee requests the exemption doesn't mean it's a slam dunk and you have to supply it. Okay, as Kevin said, we have most of our topics for the end of the year, but we fully expect to keep doing this. So please, if there's something you'd like to hear about, let us know.
All right, we do have a couple questions, and I know we're running late, so we'll try to do these quick. Someone asked a question: is the FFCRA still ending at the end of September?
As of right now, it is, although, so for the most part, yes, it goes away. Biden's plan includes allowing time off for vaccine and for side effects of the vaccine. That hasn't been hammered out yet exactly what that's going to mean, but yes, for the most part, FFCRA is gone.
Okay. And then when we were talking about the vaccine mandates for the over 100 employee companies, would that apply to independent contractors working on site?
Great question. It should not, but it remains to be seen how the ETS is going to count workers. It could use the word worker instead of the word employee, and then yes, absolutely.
And someone asked about the vendors who are doing the on-site testing. I know we had one last week, and I can't remember the name, but we'll try to drum that up and put it in the email. I think I mentioned there's a company called Wellness Coaches. I know it does it, but someone else had a name in chat last week. Question asked, what if employees says they're vaccinated, but is unwilling to share a copy of the vaccination card? So I'm assuming this means they verbally told you, but there's no documented proof. And I think we've talked before, you can require the documented proof.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think it's also important to have a vaccine policy. Whether you're making it mandatory or simply voluntary, that part of that policy is we want to see cards. We're not going to take your word for it that you've been vaccinated. And so if you are having different rules, for example, around masking or around travel, around social distancing, you can just differentiate between people who've shown you proof of vaccination and those who have not.
Yep, and I think that's, and again, at some point, I think people will have policies and procedures that apply to vaccine. So it's, you put it on the employee to be eligible for whatever you set up for vaccinated individuals.
Right. And we've gotten a lot of questions about, well, what if I've had COVID and I can show antibodies? My position on that is, well, that's not what the CDC is saying. The CDC is saying that people need to be vaccinated to get X, Y, and Z as far as benefits go. So I would recommend that to employers, stick with what the CDC says.
Yeah. Someone asked a question if the IT needs to access cards in order to run reports. And so I guess I want to put in Salesforce someone's vaccine status. Is that going to create an issue?
I would try not to do that. I would try not to have it anywhere you really want it limited to anyone with a real need to know basis. So HR and maybe a handful of supervisors. I wouldn't want others to have access to that. But if it's a particular concern and you're a member, happy to talk it through with you.
And someone said, when is an ETS expected? I'm not sure I know what ET is.
It's the emergency temporary standard from OSHA. I think about 60 days. So that would put us into probably November. So stay tuned.
Okay. Someone asked a question: does a federal contractor mandate require time off for vax or side effects?
I have not seen that. But we could certainly look at that for you. If you want to send a question to hotline, we can look at that more closely for you if you remember.
Okay, and I'm not sure I understand this question. Let me read it. So clients who have vaccine mandates, can they send the dates of their employees' doses or their confidentiality issues? I'm not completely sure I understand that.
So I think what they're saying is we have a client who says for our employee to go on site, they need proof of vaccination. So what can you do as far as the proof of vaccination? I mean, I think interestingly enough, it doesn't violate any, you might want to get your employees written permission to send a copy of the Vax card. But the reality is if the client doesn't get the proof, they don't have to let your employee on site. So, and if your employee can't go on site, chances are they can't do their job. So it becomes a whole cyclical issue.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a setup for the booster requirements in the future, in terms of how long, but yeah. But like you said, someone can set much more stringent requirements on guests in their facility than they, so.
Right.
Vaccine card has a date of birth. Can we just hide that and provide a copy of the card?
Yeah, if people don't want, you're saying for an employee to provide it to their,
yeah.
I mean, if the employee is providing to their employer, if they're providing to HR already knows your date of birth. So, but yeah, if you need to, for example, send it to a client, and you can always redact the date of birth.
Okay, and then one more question, and where is it inconsistent to follow CDC domestic travel guidance for work travel and not personal travel?
I think the issue, I mean, the short answer is probably yes, but the issue about following it for personal travel is the administrative burden that it places on the employer. And I think that's the best argument for not doing it. Obviously, if it's business travel, you know exactly where everybody's going and when they're going. When it's personal travel, you would have to expend some resources to figure that out. And keep in mind, if you're going to track personal travel, put something out in writing and let people know what the consequences are for lying about it. So if you have an employee who says, I'm taking a week off and I'm doing a staycation, and then somebody sees on Facebook that they've gone to Mexico, what are your consequences going to be for that?
And somebody commented about their wellness vendors offering to collect, track, and report. So I guess that's on the vaccine status. So that's something to look into. And if we find out who the vendors, we'll share it. All right, everybody. Well, good session. Thank you for sticking with us for longer than expected. So hope you can join us at the Total Rewards Summit next week. And then the week after, we'll kind of delve deeply back into all things pandemic as we all prepare for the fall and see what's going to happen. Have a great week. Take care. It's Health Check 350 is the name of the company. I think that just popped in there. All right. Thank you.